Lake George Battlefield Moments, a production of Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance, preserving our area's incredible history. Here's historian Dr. Bruce Venter.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bruce Venter. I am a trustee of Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance. And this edition, we're going to talk to Noah Chirnomas, and he is the author of a new book on the islands of Lake George, exploring the history and mystery of those islands. Welcome, Noah.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'd like to start with a little bit of your background because you're a young fellow, and this is your second book. You just graduated from college. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I just graduated this past May from Muhlenberg College in Pennsylvania. I have a degree in accounting and finance, and while I'm starting my career in public accounting, I've always had a passion learning the history about Lake George, particularly the islands. So for this recent book, over 3 years, I researched and ended up publishing The Islands of Lake George, which explores the history of the 125 named islands on the lake. And I had so much fun over these past 3 years, traveling to many different places, both local and afar, to find the material to write this book. So many amazing photographs that brought the history and stories of these islands to life.
I think it's an amazing book. I attended your lecture a couple of weeks ago at the Lake George Land Conservancy. You go through a lot of the islands in your talk, so I encourage anyone who's listening, if you see Noah on a lecture circuit, please feel free to attend. You'll enjoy it very much because of his PowerPoint presentation and his knowledge. Today we're going to talk about a few of the lakes that have a significance to the 18th century. Prisoner's Island was something that I didn't know much about, but tell us about that one.
Prisoner's Island has a great history. Earliest reference I could find to Prisoner's Island was on a map from 1855. Originally, the island was known as Mudden Island, or Isle en Mouton. Mouton is French for sheep. And so the island became renamed to Prisoners for its significance during the French and Indian War. There's a story told that in July of 1758, the British unsuccessfully attacked Fort Carillon, later renamed Fort Ticonderoga, at the Battle of Carillon. The British managed to capture 148 French troops. They brought them to a small island near Ticonderoga, since named Prisoner's Island. And that story is how the island received its name. Now, a favorite story of mine relates to this island. The story goes that the French, who knew this part of the lake quite well, were aware of the shallow waters between the island and the shore western side. And so overnight, they waded across to the shoreline on the west and ended up leaving the British Guard alone on the island the next morning. And it was told that they were able to go fight alongside their fellow French troops the next day. However, there are sources that indicate that the British actually transported these prisoners to the southern end of the lake. But regardless, it's still a favorite story of mine.
Well, a favorite island of mine, of course, is Diamond Island. We're not going to talk about the actual Battle of Diamond Island. We've done that before on our podcast. But I'd like you to tell us a little bit about that obelisk that's on the island, because it relates to the 18th century colonial wars on Lake George.
So if anyone goes to picnic on Diamond Island today, if you go to the northern end of the island, you'll see what's nicknamed today the Peace Stone. It's a large, about 10-foot tall stone monolith that's on the northern end of the island. And Katrina Trask, who was the wife of renowned financier Spencer Trask, spent childhood summers at Lake George. She always loved Diamond Island, had a special place in her heart. She ended up receiving the island as a gift in 1901 from two friends, George Foster Peabody and Edward Moore Shepherd, for whom Shepherd Park in the village is named after. So now, owning this island that she loved, rather than keeping it to herself, she actually welcomed the public to come and picnic and spend time on Diamond Island. Her and Spencer built a dock, put up a pavilion, and had signs there welcoming the public to come and visit the island. Around the winter of 1904, Edward Moore Shepherd and Katrina Trask had the idea to take a large 10-foot chunk of rock from near Warrensburg, transported it over the frozen lake, over the ice, and put it on the northern end of the island. Edward Moore Shepherd had a long interest in the island's history and the history of this lake during the colonial era, and they ended up dedicating it as the Peace Stone. They had a small dedication ceremony. There are 3 bronze plaques at the base of the monolith, sharing a little more history about the lake and its importance during colonial times.
Yes, and of course, General Burgoyne mentioned Diamond Island in his hearing before Parliament. And so there's some of these islands that actually had names in the 18th century. One was Diamond Island. What were some of the other ones?
So after all my research, as of right now, I've only been able to find 4 islands that were already named prior to 1800. Those 4 being Long Island, Diamond Island, 14 Mile Island, and Green Island.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about 14 Mile Island.
So 14 Mile Island today is privately owned. It was named already by 1777, according to a journal from a soldier from that year. And presumably the name 14 Mile Island comes from the fact of soldiers during the American Revolution miscalculating the distance between the island to the southern end of the lake or Fort George. That distance is actually closer to 11 miles.
Yeah, that's why I wanted you to talk about that, because Colonel John Brown, when he went to attack Diamond Island in 1777, in his report, he had to stop at what we're calling 14 Mile Island, but in his report, he called it 12 Mile Island. And I always tried to find a 12 Mile Island, and I could never find it, but it's really named 14, but it's probably closer to 12 Mile Island. So I think you've clarified that mystery for me, so I appreciate that very much. Tell me about Long Island.
Yes, so Long Island was actually referred to in Robert Rogers' journal. In March of 1759, Rogers and his rangers spent a night at Long Island, and they would have reached the island over the frozen lake on snowshoes.
Now, Waltonian Island has a very interesting character associated with it. I came across it from a friend of mine who was a Civil War historian, and we were both interested in Civil War cavalry. And Colonel William Mann of the 1st Michigan Cavalry had something to do with this island. And of course, the 1st Michigan Cavalry was part of the Michigan Brigade, commanded by none other than George Armstrong Custer during the Civil War. Tell me about this character, Mann.
Yes, so Colonel Mann built a cottage on Waltonian Island in the late 1800s. During this era, numerous individuals, families, and camping clubs were building cottages today, termed squatters' cabins, on numerous islands, particularly in the Narrows, but on different state-owned islands on the lake. For many years, the state did nothing, and these houses that were being built on these islands were preventing other members of the public from enjoying recreational opportunities on these islands. So Mann ended up building a cottage on Waltonian Island. It's a very nice estate. By 1916, I found an article in the New York Times. Mann was taken to court by New York State, finally had to remove his cottage, and it was said that in 1917, a crew was hired, cutting the house in multiple pieces, and they dragged the house to a nearby point on mainland over the frozen lake during the winter of 1917.
Mann was sort of like the National Enquirer of his day. He made a living doing that. Do you have any other islands you want to talk about?
Another interesting piece of history from the 1700s is that multiple islands on the lake were deeded by King George III to soldiers who served for the British during the French and Indian War. And so he gave them tracts of land around the lake. Particularly the two I have in mind are Elizabeth Island. Wasn't called Elizabeth back then, but King George III deeded about 200 acres of property on the mainland just east of Elizabeth to a soldier by the name of Hugh McNabb, 1774. He also included a small island, which has become known as Elizabeth. Long Island was also deeded to 2 soldiers who served for the British during the French and Indian War.
I wish King Charles III had deed me about 200 acres on Lake George. That'd be great. So this is your second book. Is there a third book in the offing?
I'm definitely exploring other projects about Lake George history. I'll be working full-time soon, so it will take a little bit more time to get through that, but I'm definitely exploring that, and stay tuned for that.
Now, I know that you spoke today at Fort William Henry. Is that right?
Yes.
What is your next lecture in your calendar?
So next week, I'll be speaking at the Chapman Museum, as well as up in Hewlett's Landing. And then the following week, I'll be at the Hillview Library in Diamond Point.
So how would people find out about your lectures?
They've all been announced in the Glens Falls Chronicle, and the websites for these respective organizations will have more information as well.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, I encourage everyone to go and listen to Noah's talk and watch his PowerPoint. Remind everyone, the book is called The Islands of Lake George, Exploring the History and Mysteries. Live around Lake George, you've got to have this book. It's a beautiful book. It's filled with a number of photographs and maps and images. Get the book. Thanks very much. See you next time.
Thank you for having me.
We'll be sharing information about on the podcast on the Battlefield Park Alliance's YouTube channel. And thanks for being a part of our history.
Lake George Battlefield Moments, a production of Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance, preserving our area's incredible history. For more information or to check out the latest podcast, go to lakegeorgebattlefield.org and listen live on Saturday mornings to Lake George Battlefield Moments on 93.5 Lake FM.